Hi, everyone, and welcome to breakout session number 3, which is our Family Talks session. And I'd like to introduce Danielle Boyce, who is from Tufts University Medical Center.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. Do we have people with lived experience here, people who have children, perhaps, with this condition? I'm just trying to get a sense of the room here. You can raise your hand, or if you want to ask any questions or stop me along the way. Yep, grandson, I see. Okay, so we have someone with a grandson I see here. And probably other people will be trickling in, and probably some people will be watching the recording as well. So I'm just going to share my screen. Thank you very much for having me. I'm watching the chat. A client, you're a SLP and just looking to hear more experiences. That's terrific. That's really terrific. I wish more people did that. Okay. So as Jennifer mentioned, and I'm going to try to keep an eye on the chat. Oh, mom of a 4-year-old. Wow. Okay. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat, but please put something in the chat or shout out if something doesn't make sense or if you have a question. This is very informal. And the title of my talk is From Heartbreak to Action, Patient Engagement in Regulatory Affairs in the United States. As Jennifer mentioned, I am currently the education director of the Biomedical and Health Data Science Collaborative at Tufts. I'm a biostatistician, epidemiologist. I'm an assistant professor and investigator. I have my own grants where I study things like epilepsy and ALS, which I'll talk a little bit about today. And so I always put some objectives in at the beginning, but I hope you'll understand the contribution of patient advocacy in the advancement of research in the U.S. Really, a lot of the work that I'm going to talk about is international, but with regard to regulation, most of the work that I've done is with the FDA and NIH, so United States focused. But I recognize that not only is a lot of the work that we do as a community knows no boundaries, right? Rare disease knows no boundaries, and certainly our communities don't. So I just wanted to give a nod to that. And we're going to examine strategies for successful engagement of patient advocates with legislators and regulatory groups in the United States. So what is my origin story? Was I always a professor at Tufts, and was I always somebody who worked in this space? How did I come to learn all of these things? Well, this little guy on the left is now 14. This is my Charlie. Charlie had infantile spasms. Many of you might know what that is, which is a rare and very severe, serious form of epilepsy that babies get. And he now has Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which is another rare and terrible type of epilepsy. So Charlie's 14, and we do not know his genetic mutation, although we think there is one, but we are still looking for it. But we do believe there is something there, and we keep pushing and getting more testing and exploring that. But Charlie is 14, and he doesn't really speak. He has pretty good physical capabilities. He can walk on his own, a little bit of a weakness on one side, but he really struggles in many areas. He has multiple disabilities. He still has seizures. He's had 2 surgeries to remove much of the right side of his brain to stop the infantile spasms. He takes multiple medications. Many of you know this story well, right? And so when I had Charlie, I was a data analyst at Johns Hopkins. So at that time, I had my master's in public health with a concentration in epidemiology. I was not on faculty. I didn't have my own studies, but I was a good statistician and data analyst and had a very good job. Many people would kill for that job, is to support the work of all of these great researchers and pulmonaries where I was stationed at Johns Hopkins. So that's what I did. And I loved it. And, in public health school, I learned about disparities, and that we should work hard to overcome disparities, that there would be because of where you grew up, or because of the color of your skin, or because of the language you spoke, how much money you had, or your education level, that sometimes healthcare system was not fair to you. But certainly I thought, if you were like me, working at Johns Hopkins, had a good job, I worked in healthcare, worked with the best doctors, had good health insurance from the top medical center, certainly I would not know disparity, would I? And I was wrong, because I had Charlie. And when I had Charlie, it just turned everything I thought I knew just upside down, because here I was begging insurance companies and drug companies, and begging for coverage, begging for services. This was not the world that I thought would be there if something happened to me or a loved one. We just assume that if you don't if you're not faced with these types of socioeconomic situations, then you would not have these disparities. And I can tell you, having a master's in public health and concentration in epidemiology didn't help me one bit. Charlie was denied coverage of drugs that he needed, tests that he needed, services that we needed for him. And it was just a constant struggle. So that's how I decided I needed to do something. And certainly in the communities where I was working, those places where there were disparities, those folks that did have things like language barriers or insurance barriers, or just because of where they were and their access to good hospitals, for example, were limited, they had it even so much worse than I could even imagine. And so I realized that somehow, eventually, sometime, somewhere, I was going to change how this all happens, because this is not right. And so on the right, you can see it's about 5 years after Charlie was diagnosed. So remember, Charlie's 14, so I've been in this for a long time. About 5 years after he was diagnosed, we published this paper, which is a poster here that I'm standing in front of. And you're going to have a trip down memory lane of all my hairstyles in this too, because I like to change my hair, or at least I used to. But this here on the right is a screening tool that we developed. I developed with a group of neurologists, and we just actually published a second paper, just like we're just about to publish it in Epilepsia, on a further validation of this instrument. Where, one of the challenges that I noticed just talking to other parents on Facebook was that we weren't getting diagnosed with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome swiftly, because a lot of physicians had felt like we weren't meeting the definition of what Lennox-Gastaut syndrome is, because it was like an old-fashioned definition that involved an EEG. And if you have ever met a child with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, it's really hard to get an EEG on a kid with Lennox-Gastaut, or especially an older kid like Charlie. And so if you have to have a certain EEG pattern to get the diagnosis, then you're out of luck. And then if you don't get the diagnosis and you can't Google it, right, and meet me, you just Google really bad epilepsy, you're not going to meet me. But if you Google Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, you'll find our community and all the wonderful support. And so that's what really drove me. And I was also driven by this idea of the medications that were approved specifically for Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. If you didn't know you even had that diagnosis, or that your child or an adult in front of you in a facility that cares for people with severe intellectual disability, I was concerned that these people would be missed. And so that I went from this mom who knew nothing about anything. I remember when they sent me home with Charlie after he was diagnosed with infantile spasms, and they said they really wanted me to participate in this study on infantile spasms. And here I was with a master's in public health, okay, but I was working in pulmonary, so I really didn't have any neuro background at all. And they sent me home, and I was fine, just kind of dust settling, reading all this stuff, and just, my head is spinning. And I'm reading the consent form that they sent me home with, and it had something like, your child's been diagnosed with seizures and epilepsy. I said, seizures? No, it's infantile spasms though. Right? So I didn't even know, that's how green I was. Yeah, that's how green I was. So So what you see before you and all the cool stuff I'm doing, that did not happen overnight, is the first thing I want to impress upon you. So one of the first things I did, which was I think one of the most impactful things that I did was I was involved with the Tuberous Sclerosis Alliance, who are a really wonderful group if you're familiar with them, and they've done a lot of work to help all of us who have kids with seizures and neurological conditions, and just a really terrific group. And they do a lot of great research. But as part of my relationship with them, I had won an award for my advocacy work. And as part of that, we started this Infantile Spasms Awareness Week, which now is in its like 10th year or something like that. And so this is Dr. James Wheelis, who some of you might know, really great guy. And so we did a satellite media tour where we were in Philadelphia, but the cameras came to us and we were all over the country. And so I was talking about it from my perspective as a mom, and then he showed a video of a kid with infantile spasms, and so we did this repeatedly. And I have heard over the years that people have seen that video or videos or other things related to the Infantile Spasms Awareness Week campaign. And that can, if you're diagnosed early, that can really change the course of your child's trajectory developmentally. So like if I had never done anything else but that kind of thing, those awareness activities, like looking back, I think I felt like it was kind of small, these awareness things and these things, like I put things on Facebook about infantile spasms, but like in reality, that is some of the most impactful work, even more so than some of the papers I've written, I feel, because of the people they reached and the impact that it had and helping actual people. And thinking about advocacy and our tendencies to convene and find each other. So you might hear infantile spasms called West syndrome. So this is Dr. W.J. West, who is the name, what this is named after, right? West syndrome, 1841. So he's reaching out to the Lancet. He's reaching out to his peers. They didn't have Facebook back then. As the only case I have witnessed is in my own child, I shall be very grateful to any member of the profession who can give me any information on the subject, either privately or through your excellent publication. So he's looking for Facebook, basically, right? And if you look at this whole letter, it'll give you the chills, because if any of you have been on social media to meet other parents or loved ones, a lot of what he's saying is really reminds you of the way you kind of describe what you're seeing and what you've done and where you've looked and what you're trying to figure out about your kid and how you can help them. And that's all. And that's what he was doing. And that's what we all do. And since the very beginning of all of this. So while all this was going on and Charlie was diagnosed with infantile spasms, and then, initially, I don't have to tell you all, but initially when they're diagnosed, it's just like a bomb goes off in your life. And you're not really thinking about like, I'm going to be an advocate and be a famous researcher and, get my PhD. Like you're not even thinking about anything like that. It's just like day-to-day survival. But during this time, I was still working because I had to. I couldn't not work because our insurance wasn't great, but it was all we had, right? And I was the breadwinner at the time. So I was working, and one of my projects was working on the transition to EPIC, electronic health record system. EPIC is now really quite a famous electronic health record system in the United States, and really has a lot of the market cornered in EHR data. So what that means is when you go to the doctor, whether you're in there for research or not, information is documented, as I'm sure you know, in your chart. And so at the time I was working on trying to migrate all this pulmonary function testing lab stuff over to EPIC, and I was kind of leading all of that. And I would sit up at night thinking like, I'm hearing these other parents, I'm trying to learn from all these other parents who have been in this a lot longer. As I'm sure there are a lot of people, their kids are like 20s and 30s, and here I had a baby. And so I was really trying to learn from them. And one of the things I heard them complaining about was that we didn't have a lot of opportunities to participate in studies, that there weren't a lot of drugs that were being investigated for this condition, and or if your kid was far enough along in their journey, they wouldn't be eligible for a lot of the studies, that they're mainly looking for like newly diagnosed people, not people who've had brain surgeries and stuff. But I was thinking to myself, thinking about my work with the EPIC migration, our kids are in the hospital all the time, like all the time. And they have a lot of tests, and they have a lot of therapies, and they have, and all of this is being captured somewhere. And at this time, we started taking an interest, we as a like informatics and data science community started taking a really keen interest in this real world data, real world evidence. And so what would keep me up at night was how are kids like Charlie, with and without a genetic diagnosis, how are they captured in EHR? You know, is there a code? Do we use it? What would be the other things that we would look for in EHR in that database? What if there was a drug that somebody thought would work for a kid like Charlie, but they couldn't find Charlie because there wasn't a way to easily flag him? So that kind of seeds, I started thinking a lot about, you know, what if I started developing methods for doing this, and what would I need to do? Would I need to go back to school? What program would I do? What would I do? And so this is that poster that I was referring to. So this is one of the first things that we did with this kind of idea of phenotyping. And the first one was just identifying what we would look for. And the one that we've published or are about to publish in epilepsia, we actually had people go through charts. We did a chart review to see if we could actually find these things. And the spoiler alert is that it works, and we can find people who need to see an epileptologist, who otherwise were not flagged as somebody who might need to see someone and maybe take seizure meds. And these were among grown people who are living in care facilities. So we think that it would work even better if there was like a parent there to help provide information. We were just basing it on the electronic health record. So that was kind of like my first taste of this and success under my belt. And then the other thing that I started working on is electronic health records research. This is a screen from a tool called Atlas. And this has become really a passion of mine. And I'm kind of in leadership in this field around this topic. It's called the Observational Health Data Science Informatics group, which is Odyssey, OHDSI. And this is the OMOP Common Data Model, Observational Medical Outcomes Partnership. And that all sounds like alphabet soup, but what that is it's a way of taking for free. These are all free tools, open science. It's a way of taking for free your electronic health records, transforming them all into the same format all around the world. And we have this all around the world. Johns Hopkins does it, Tufts does it. All these institutions do it. You transform all your EHR data, and because of that, then all the tables are the same across centers. All the fields are named the same. Everything is coded the same. Then you can write one script and find all the Charlies all around the world. I didn't invent this. It just, I got into it, and I'm finding new ways of working with patient registries and EHR and claims and all kinds of things to help us to find these kids and understand their experiences, not just kids, but adults, and understand their experiences. So that's been a way that I'm using my voice and my lived experience. And of course, around this time, so Charlie was diagnosed 2011. And so 2016 was the 21st Century Cures Act, which was a framework for the real world evidence program. So registries, person-generated data, EHR data, and regulatory decision-making. And so when I saw that, I thought, yeah, that's it for me. That's where I'm going to fit in, because I wanted to understand how all this data stuff that I knew how to do fit into the regulatory framework. Like, okay, it's great that I know how to do all of this, but does the FDA care? Does anybody even, will they even let me use this for anything? And I'd see a lot of patient groups putting together registries, and it worried me, that the FDA might not think this is compatible, or that maybe they needed to be advised, these groups. And so I've done a lot of work around registries in that area, but that's why if you see my name as DPA, my doctorate is in public administration. And public administrations basically have a PhD in bureaucracy, which probably most of you who have kids or grandkids already have an honorary PhD in bureaucracy, because of fighting with insurance companies trying to get things covered for your kids. But I officially have one. And so that's what I decided to do, was to be a public administration expert, and then lend my expertise in bridging between data science and regulation, and how we can improve things for people trying to study rare diseases in particular, but really any disease that involves electronic health record or registries. Something else I got involved with, which I encourage you to look into, is the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. And I was a member of their rare disease advisory panel for many years, and I retired from that last year. Now I'm a stakeholder reviewer for their grants. So it's very detailed process that I'm very honored to be a part of. I just finished one round. I'm going to do another one in May, where we review the grants that come in. Some of you may be familiar with the PCORI grants, but here I am giving a talk about multi-stakeholder research to them, and then they listen. And so here I am using my lived experience. So much of what I do that is really meaningful has nothing to do with my education or training. It's 100% because I am a parent. And so I really want to highlight that too. The fact that I have a doctorate makes people sometimes listen to me, and where they might not have listened to me if I didn't have my doctorate. But the skills that I have, the things that I know, so often are just purely because I'm Charlie's mom. I would have no way of knowing a lot of this very, very valuable things, these valuable things that I know. And so when you see things like projects like PCORI that are very focused on patient-centeredness and patient engagement, that's what they're trying to capture, because they get that. They understand that there are things that only patients know and care about. And they also want to know if we care about it. This happens a lot in Charlie's epilepsy world, where, Charlie has a good number of seizures. And so if you were to say, you were going to reduce the seizures by a count of, 10 a year, I don't know if that would be a great outcome for us, because he has so many. If you said 50%, it might be different, right? So it's really important to hear all the perspectives. And so some of the things that are interesting, I just wanted to kind of give you a taste of all the cool things that I get to work on. This is something that I'm working on now. Well, not actually specifically the Gemini study, but I want to bring this to your attention, because this is the kind of stuff that really, like, this is one of those things where I feel like, boy, I could have told you that, as a mom. So what this is Dr. Jonathan Davis, who's my colleague, and I recently joined his team at Tufts. So he is the chief of newborn medicine at Tufts, and he felt that, not to speak for John, but he felt that there were a lot of really sick kids in the NICU that if they just had genetic testing, like proper, like whole genome, if they had really comprehensive genetic testing, that maybe he could intervene, and it would, and not only help the baby and help the family and prevent disabilities and all these things, but it would actually save money, right? And like everybody cares about, like I often say, okay, if you don't care about my sick child, do you care that you're going to save money, right? And so he obviously preventing other unnecessary tests. And so he put out this Gemini study, and to me it was really groundbreaking. And like I said, like I could have told you that. And as time has gone on, I've been in this for a long time. I've been in this field for 30 years, but I've been Charlie's mom for 14. And early on in the infantile spasms odyssey, we were not getting routine genetic testing. We really fought for that. And so over time, we would meet families who would benefit from that push that we did for genetic testing, and realize that sometimes there are treatments and supplements and other things that can be done, not just in the epilepsy world, but, you know, across other rare conditions as well. And so this is really exciting to me. And so my role on this project is not with the Gemini study, but now what we're trying to work on, and this is kind of what I'm charged with figuring out, is how do we use electronic health records and patient registries, real world data, as the external control arm for clinical trials, which means in a clinical trial, you have the intervention group and you have the control arm or placebo group. And in rare disease, it's often not practical, not ethical. There's lots of reasons, especially with neonate, little tiny babies, right? To do a control arm or placebo, a fake, not actually giving them the medication, the study drug. That's not right. And it also takes a long time to enroll people, right? Because you have a rare condition maybe, and you have to match them up just so in order for the study to go the way it's supposed to go in the protocol. And so the idea is, can we take patients with a similar condition and follow them in the electronic health record and use them as the control, and without even having to enroll them. And so I think about how much faster it would go if we could do that. And so there are a lot of data quality challenges, a lot of logistical issues, a lot of statistical issues. But you know, I'm an infantile spasms mom. You know, that's not hard for me. You know, we'll figure it out. And so that's what I'm working on. So it's just really exciting. So there's a lot of really exciting work going on, and I'm kind of a cheerleader for this kind of work, which I think is infectious. And people have a hard time saying no to me because I love what we do so much, and I have Charlie, and so he's what drives me. So, but all of this requires money, awareness, insurance coverage, all these things, right? So enter advocacy. I've talked a little bit about my advocacy, but I just want to give you a little bit more background for those of you who are kind of new to this space. Nothing about us without us is our rally cry, right? We do not want science to be conducted, or anything, policy, anything to be done without our voice, without us having a seat at the table. Us meaning people with lived experience, people who represent those who cannot represent themselves, right? People like my Charlie, who cannot speak for himself. And this is an old, see, Danielle is getting me hyped. Yes, Lauren. Yes. Nothing about us without us. All right. So wait. So here's Judy Heumann. I'm not going to, I wish I could do 2 days worth of lectures on Judy Heumann. She's a hero. But she was a disability rights activist. And I really kind of want to differentiate the disability rights stuff from the rare disease, like the disease specific stuff, because for this talk, but really those of us who are in it, we know that yes, we have all the stuff that we have to do to advocate around rare disease, but then we also have to deal with the fact that our family member or loved one has disabilities. And they're often not treated fairly because of that too, right? So it's like, and I work with ALS, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. And people with ALS have done a lot of work to advocate for their wheelchairs not getting smashed when they go on an airplane. Like, it's a whole thing that their wheelchairs get ruined. And many of us know that feeling, right? Of our kids and their equipments and traveling and things like that. So we need disability rights advocates and activists, and I encourage you to study them. Others, if you want to get fired up, study the HIV/AIDS activists. And here they are taking over the FDA building because they were fed up that they did not have a seat at the table. AIDS was a death sentence at this time. And they did not have a voice. They were not asked, gee, how much risk would you be willing to take on in a clinical trial? To get an experimental treatment. They didn't have a seat at the table. And they did all of these like super well organized protests with no cell phone. It just blows me away. And I don't recommend climbing on top of a building as your first line, but it wasn't theirs either. Right. And so I actually have had the great pleasure on a few occasions to work with one of these activists who now is a professor at Yale. And just to hear the stories and his perspective, Greg Gonzalez you can look him up. Incredible people, really takes my breath away thinking about this traumatized community in 1988. And look what they did. If any of you have ever participated, as I have, in FDA patient engagement activities, you have these people to thank for it. Look down here, 1988. That's when patient engagement started at the FDA. And so I was on the pediatric advisory committee. I've been on AdCom for Epidiolex, which is a cannabidiol drug for Lennox-Gastaut syndrome and Dravet syndrome. I am a patient representative, all of those things because of them. And if you're wondering how influential patient advocacy is, look no further. This is the back of a jacket at one of these protests. If I die of AIDS, forget burial, just drop my body on the steps of the FDA. And fast forward, not long ago, if I die in a school shooting, drop my body on the steps of the CDC. So not to point out, not to compare these movements or take position on anything, but just to say this is a very influential, patient advocacy has been very influential in politics and reform in the United States. The other thing to study is the Denver Principles. The Denver Principles were put out by these folks with HIV/AIDS, and it is a playbook of how they expect to be treated and how they promise they will conduct themselves in engaging in all of this decision making, whether it's drug development, whether it's regulatory matters, and so on. So to form caucuses, choose their own representative, be involved in every level of decision making, be included in all AIDS forums with equal credibility, which is where I'm at with all of this. When I have a patient advocate sitting on my panel, they are the same as me. So I do not want the organizer to think of them as any less than or lower than me just because they don't have a doctorate and I do. And so they started this. They demanded this. This Denver Principles is a long document. So as time went on, I got really fired up about all of this, right? And interested in HIV/AIDS and other diseases and what else is out there. And so I became really connected to the ALS, so amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or Lou Gehrig's disease community. ALS is a universally fatal disease. Usually you pass away within 5 years of your diagnosis, often, and I've seen this firsthand within a year or two. A lot of people lose their ability to speak, to eat, to drink, to walk, to talk, and it's a terrible disease. And really your prognosis is, because of challenges with drug development and some of the things that I've talked about with control groups and outcome measures and other things, your prognosis now is not that much better than Lou Gehrig all those years ago in the 1940s. So I talk about getting fired up. This community changed me, and now I actually have a CDC funded project to study ALS, and I do tons of stuff in ALS, but I encourage you to study them, and I'm just going to highlight a little bit of what they do. This was my good friend, Sandy Morris. Sandy was the best advocate I ever met, ever. And, it's a different perspective when you have the condition versus advocating for your child, and how quickly you have to learn while you are getting sick, at the same time is just astounding. And she used to say, "You can't scare me. I have ALS." She wasn't afraid to learn anything or do anything or stick up for herself or the community. Amazing. So if you want inspiration, look no further than the ALS community. So Sandy was very influenced by the HIV/AIDS community and knew Greg, who I told you about, Greg Gonzalez. And so she created the Morris ALS principles after the Denver principles. And it is take no prisoners. I encourage you to Google this, the Morris ALS principles. Today, we unite as leaders to end ALS. We take ownership of our disease so that the road to cures is faster, equitable, and more humane. Sandy and I and some others started this group, the ALS Problem Solvers, which developed 5 COGS. It's an organization agnostic group. What does that mean? It means many of us work with various organizations in the ALS community, but this is not an organization. It is just a place where people get together regardless of what their organizational affiliation is, and we just have ideas. And we have meetings with the NIH and FDA, and we have seats at all kinds of tables. And when I say we, it's mostly the patient advocate, because I'm not a person with lived experience in ALS, although I've lost many friends to it by now. But they have 5 COGS that they believe is going to, if they were all put in place, that would lead us to the answer and to solve the problem of ALS. And so one is a broad and deep natural history study. And so I'm working on that. So these are very thoughtful, really brilliant people, volunteers. We have pharmaceutical executives who are retired. We have a Harvard epidemiologist who's retired, who was a friend of someone who had ALS, and it goes on, and we're growing, but incredibly well organized, and we meet every week and have an agenda. Someone who we lost to ALS, one of her best friends was a project manager, like one of those really fancy project managers at a big business. And she's retired. And so now we have this incredible project manager to help us run our meetings and keep agendas, and just incredible. So ALS, man, but it gets better. So this is I Am ALS. You might have seen Brian Wallach and his wife Sandra on CBS Sunday Morning. They worked for the Obama administration. He's an attorney, and she is I think like a communications PR expert. And he has ALS. I think it's going on 5 years now. So they started I Am ALS. And what haven't they done? Here's just a list. I encourage you to go to their website. Secured millions of dollars for an act called Act for ALS. Testified on Capitol Hill numerous times. Hosted events. Organized. But the thing I really want to highlight is how they've organized into committees, and they have this legislative affairs committee, and they meet weekly, and they strategically figure out how they're going to change things, how they're going to get ALS in the forefront of this, of all of these different initiatives, and all of the Congress and legislators, and it's so strategic. And here's more and more and more about all the things that they've done, advocating for drugs, working with veterans, because ALS is a service-associated condition. A town hall, so a drug didn't get approved or had an unfavorable reaction from the FDA, and so they organized, they mobilized. And how did they do that? And who better than someone who worked in presidential politics to help lead this? But what they did was, which I wanted to show you, is you should look this up. This is a playbook, a guide to organizing. Because I would often say, well, yeah, but we don't have a Brian and Sandra, right? Like in my community, we don't have that. Like they have me, so I can explain stuff that has to do with data, but I wouldn't know really how to lead someone in like the legislative side. So they were funded to make this playbook. And it gives you all kinds of great ideas for how you can get organized too. This is one of my favorite quotes by Representative John Lewis. When I get down, because believe me, I do. I have a child with a rare form of epilepsy. Charlie wears diapers. I have to take care of him. I have to watch him, 24/7, right? He has seizures. It's a lot. It's a lot. Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get into good trouble, necessary trouble. My favorite good trouble is right here. This is my partner in crime, Pat Dolan, and his wife, Mara. Pat has ALS. Pat was an expert, but he used to work for a company called Esri that makes ArcGIS software. That is the leading software that makes maps. And so the CDC uses it, Johns Hopkins uses it, everybody uses this software to do mapping. And Pat was diagnosed many years ago with ALS. He's alive because he has this trach to helps him breathe. He's paralyzed, and he makes gorgeous professional maps with his eyes. He uses eye gaze technology on a computer, and he makes these maps. And I just met with him Thursday. I meet with them. He is on my CDC ALS grant. We are mapping the history of residential exposures, potential exposures. So where you lived over time, we were documenting that. And then we're overlaying that with what we know from these big databases on where like pesticides were sprayed and how much over time, to try to understand if your lifetime exposure to certain things, certain chemicals might have some correlation with having ALS. And so, no big deal. He's just was ALS and doing this with his eyes, but amazing. And so we have this ALS geospatial hub. And so the other thing that he's very passionate about is this survey, a clinic advisor survey, it's called, and also with this Esri software. So people can enter in information about their clinic and their clinic experiences, and then it automatically maps. And so new people who come in, it's kind of like Yelp, new people who are diagnosed can understand like what kinds of services and things are available from the patient and, the family perspective, where you offered clinical trial participation and things like that. So this is another thing that we do. So in conjunction with Team Gleason, Steve Gleason was a football player with the New Orleans Saints, and he has ALS, and he's devoted his life to helping others in so many ways. I can't even calculate them, but a lot with these eye gaze technologies and adaptive technologies, but he's incredible. And so what we did here was we looked at the CDC's ALS registry and mapped the drive time, the clinic drive time around those who participated, and to see if there were like places where people were not responding, and maybe that's because they were not actually getting care because they weren't near an actual clinic. And so we've done a lot of work around like this, like the social justice piece around this. And this is all data science, and this is just my volunteer work. But these people are really blow me away. And so the other thing that Pat and I did to shake things up, I hope you're fired up because get ready. So we attached mapping to the NIH reporter database. The NIH reporter database tells you all the different studies that were funded. And so we gave this to IMALS and other advocates. And so what you can do is you can look up for your district, you can look all around, you can see what studies were funded in ALS or not funded, or whatever the status is. And then you get all the information. I don't really know how he linked this to the representative, but he's a genius. But the House and Senate, right, viewer. And so we connected this to the House and Senate. He even got their picture. And so now if you have a phone bank or a group of legislative, advocates, patient advocates, they can go to their own state and own area and speak very intelligently, especially if you give them a template, right, about what's going on with ALS. Like, thank you very much for funding this study or being a part of that. Like, we'd really like to encourage this. It's very good for the healthcare system, whatever it is, right? Whatever the angle is, but we did that with data science, and now they have it. And famous person in medicine here, William Osler, famous to Johns Hopkins. He who studies medicine without book sales and uncharted sea, but he who studies medicine without patience does not go to sea at all. And with that, I thank you. I thank the organizers. Thank you so much for having me and expanding, my horizons, and new diseases in areas that I might want to study and be interested in. And I just want to thank all of you, and of course Charlie. This is Charlie. He's Luigi, and that's my little guy. I have 4 kids, and that's my little guy Nash as Mario. So thank you very, very much for having me. I'm so glad you're hyped, Lauren. Are you still hyped?
I'm so hyped. Like, I can't even. That was phenomenal. The whole time I was like,
Awesome.
yes, I'm ready. I'm ready to raise all the money.
Yes.
That was
Yes.
so awesome. I
Awesome.
think I do want to say one of the most impactful things, aside from how everything else you've done is just phenomenal. Like, it blew me away. I have no words. And it may be a very small, trivial part of something that you said earlier, but it was so impactful just to let people know that what you think is small, what you're doing that you think is small is not small. So sharing a Cure Grin post, telling someone about your child, whatever it may be, it may seem small to you, and it's not. It can make such a huge impact for the organization, for the kids.
Yes.
Yeah, that really stuck with me.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really something I want to get across, because that is something that we can all do. Like, you know, I think a lot of times people, well, you know, I didn't do all the things that you did, Danielle, and so I didn't, you know, I'm not making a difference.
I think
And
it
it's like,
scares people.
it
I think it
scares
scares
people.
them, right?
Yeah, it does. And you know, I also find that there is like people feel uncomfortable around really sad and catastrophic things, right? And
Yeah.
that's something that I learned, like, as a culture, we get uneasy around lived experience. And I told someone the other day, I was writing a grant with some pretty muckety folks and I said, it's like when I tell you I have lived experience, my IQ goes down in your eyes. Like, what is that?
What
What
is
is that? When I say that I'm a mom, like, and instead of saying, oh man, then you probably know like everything about, like, that's how I think. Like,
you would think,
like,
yeah.
I'm thinking, like, I'm sitting in this room and I'm thinking to myself, all right, I know where I'm going to go when I want to know what drugs are on the horizon, what drugs are usually given,
Yes,
what
absolutely.
drugs,
Yes.
what phenotyping, you know, how kids usually present with this, the differential diagnosis. I'm going to you. I have a friend in infantile spasms community who is like the first person I go to before my famous neurogeneticist doctor,
Yeah.
who lives in the Bronx, right? And like, and I
that.
don't even know if she has a college degree. I never asked. I don't care, because she's the one, because she sits in all these infantile spasms groups.
Okay.
And she has been doing this for like 20 years. And so she has seen more patients than anyone. So one of the things that the other thing that I didn't touch on here, but I think when you said that, it really made me think about this. I advise a lot of groups on their research.
Okay.
And a lot of groups similar, they think, well, if I can't do a database that is so good that the FDA will take it and it'll cure a drug, then what's the point of doing anything?
Exactly.
And a lot of people feel that way. Like, it's so overwhelming. There's so many status standards and CDISC and OMOP. And what do we do? And, you know, outcome measures. Are we picking the right one? And then you're just like, oh God, I don't know where it's, well,
it has to be perfect. They think that if it's not perfect, then.
But it doesn't. And your power as a community is, you know, everyone, number one, that nobody else has that. You know everyone and you have their trust, right? You are all trust each other. So you know everyone, so you can find them if a company or a doctor or somebody who's doing research needs them. So that's number one. And that is so valuable, is you are all together. And the other thing is, you know your quality of life, you know your journey. And so that is not something that drug companies typically have time to capture in a very narrative way. And that is where, like, these listening sessions and things that you see are so valuable and really essential. So people understand, so regulators understand the impact. I just found out that one of my studies was approved for publication. And in that, we took the ALS CDC registry. We asked 3,200 people, why do you think you have ALS? Because you know what? We don't know why people have ALS most of the time, right?
Right.
So I said, hey, you know, like, maybe they've had some time to reflect, right? And we analyzed it with AI. So we're developing tools to be able to quickly go through narratives And that is what you have, right? You have your narrative. I remember a time with Charlie when the new drug, it was, it's clobazam, so Onfi, and it was like new back then. And when I remember when all of our kids started taking it all at once, because then it was finally approved, and none of our kids peed for like 2 days, right? And we were all talking about it. Like, is your kid peeing? Like, my kid stopped peeing. Like, is everything okay? Like, no, I talked to the doctor. They said I was crazy, the usual.
Okay.
Like, I talked to the doctor. They said, no, I'm sure it's something else or whatever. Well, sure enough, it's since come out
Of
that that could be
course.
something that could happen. And so that's all I needed to hear. Like, we called that one years ago, right?
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So the patient voice and the people you have assembled is so powerful. Don't ever forget that. That is the most important thing. And I'll be in meetings talking about my work, and I'll just mention something in passing, like about ALS. They use eye gaze technology, and how that ripple effect of how that makes people, statisticians, other doctors, other disciplines, like, think. And so that's the power you can do every day.
Right. Right.
You all have that power every day. You don't have to, it doesn't
just
have to make it to CBS Sunday morning. You don't have to get your PhD, but you
right.
could. You could, if you're, lost your mind, you could do that during COVID with 4 kids if you wanted to. But let me do that for you.
That's just, I can't tell you how helpful that's going to be to the people that are, we have so many things coming up around advocacy. We don't have an advocacy initiative yet, but it's something that I have asked ahead.
Yeah.
One of the things that we want people to get involved in soon are ICD-10 codes.
Yeah.
That we're fighting for right now, and explaining it to people and what it is a little difficult. But just having your doctor write a letter for us and all those letters compiled together to get that code is going to be so incredibly important. So like, it may look small to you, but it's not.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And somebody just said that their kid hasn't peed. Yeah. So I don't know where we are with the official labeling, but I'm just saying, like, that you are not crazy. Like, that's actually, you might want to check into that. The good news is, I'm not a physician, but the good news is, in our case, like, it just worked itself out. It's fine. But a lot of us noticed that too.
Wow.
And then later, it became understood and recognized. Like, we didn't have to stop taking it or anything. We've been on it for years, but yeah, not medical advice, but just saying, like, definitely look into that. But that was like a perfect example of, like, we could, but, like, it made me think about how, like, it's almost like surveillance, like these Facebook groups are almost like a form of surveillance, where I can go into a Facebook group and, like, we're all taking this and we're all having this problem. Interesting. Behavioral challenges when you start taking a drug and things like that. I was phenotyping people long before we got our diagnoses. I would, like, when somebody would come into the community and they would have, like, maybe a stroke at birth and vision issues and something else, we would say, they seem to be over in this with these people, these other families. And then they'd come in with some, like, maybe an autism affect or something like that. And we'd say, oh, interesting. They go over here. And then we get the COL4A1 diagnosis. We get the SCN2A, and and sure enough, they grouped up together that way. And so we have that wisdom that nobody else has.
Exactly.
And
I do
you
find
don't
that.
need a doctorate.
Yep, I do find that. It's so the groups we have are so influential. People come there because the parents know more than the doctors. And so one of the things that we're doing right now is trying to develop a grief physician list of doctors that may have treated other grief patients, but it all boils down to what's going to happen is they know because of us, right? Like they had our child first, we helped them understand grief. Now they can be a grief physician, right?
Yep. Yeah. And I have found over the years, there are physicians that I have that who will send people to me, even though Charlie doesn't have a specific diagnosis, but as you have that, they'll be like, we don't know what to do with their, diaper coverage. There's something with their Medicaid. I don't know. Let
anything
me just
send it to Lauren.
Yeah. Like that sounds like a Danielle or Lauren question. Right. And so, we can be valuable partners there too. With regard to the ICD code, that is everything. And a lot of
Yes.
people think they don't get it because they're thinking medicine old fashioned way. But for me to find our kids,
Mhm.
there has to be a way for them to be coded. And if there's no code, I have to look at context clues. Like if I want to find the kids with infantile spasms, I have to look and they're not coded. Let's say they weren't, usually they
Okay.
are. But if it were, I'd have to look for vigabatrin use, right? Because that
Okay.
you wouldn't give a baby vigabatrin probably unless they had infantile spasms. So
Okay,
I'd have to
okay,
look at
okay.
context clues. But when it comes to genetic diagnoses, and you're looking specifically for a precision medicine product for genetic diagnosis.
Mhm.
If those genetic mutation, they're all over the place in the chart.
Right.
They're uploaded
Right.
PDF reports. They're documented differently. How in these registries ask the patient themselves. I'm telling you, I couldn't figure out which one I was supposed to put. You know, if it was, even if Charlie did have the diagnosis, I wouldn't necessarily know what to put, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so that takes, having that diagnosis and using it, that ICD, takes away all of that guesswork from a data quality perspective and helps me as a researcher find you.
Mhm.
And so if no
So
other reason
helpful.
but real world data,
I mean,
that is,
incredibly helpful.
yeah,
Yes.
super valuable. I'd be happy to go to town on somebody if you ever need me.
Oh, I'm ready. You don't even understand. Like, I'm so ready.
I'm ready to tell people about ICD codes as a data scientist. It's really important.
Like, I know. And Keith had, when we first started the ICD-10 advocacy, he made a video, and one of the, it was funny in perspective, right? That there's ICD codes for, like, if you got bit by a seagull, but there's none but none
Right?
for our genetic disorder. And I just thought that was,
yeah. God forbid, you know, your kid have a catastrophic condition. That's too much to ask.
that's too much. But if you get bit by a seagull, I thought that was
right.
interesting.
If you got bit by a seagull, that is pitiful, but true.
Okay, so before we jump off, this has been great. I do have one question for you. I don't want it to be a loaded question. It's very broad, but whatever you can tell me. Since we're getting our advocacy off the ground, is there any advice you can give us as a community, me as someone who's leading it, on what small steps I can take to make us successful?
Yeah, so the first thing would be to check out the playbook and the other things from the ALS community. That would be number one, because they went from, zero, like this guy went nothing in 5 years and has had like millions and millions of dollars, acts passed, and all these things, and a lot of that was from mobilizing. I think having regular meetings, even if one person shows up.
Okay.
I think having like an advocacy like that, to me, like just not giving up when it's slow.
Okay.
I've done a lot of organizing. I've done organizing around my data science community too. And sometimes, like, I started this group for Odyssey for that open science community, and like the first couple of meetings, like it was just me and the other guy looking at each other like, I guess this isn't going. I'm like, I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna keep talking about it. I'm gonna act like this is the best thing ever. And sure enough, like now we have like 50 people. We're publishing a paper.
Oh man, how phenomenal!
But yeah, just keep going, do an agenda, like take it seriously, like do an agenda, do minutes, and talk about it, and take yourself seriously, because you should, because you organized a whole conference, for heaven's sake. Like,
I love this. I love it. I love it.
That's
awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Danielle.
You're welcome.
We're so thankful. You
Anytime.
have a wonderful day.
Oh, look, he's talking muscle relaxation. It's called urinary retention based on mechanism. Oh, cool. Hey, thanks, Patrick.
Thanks, Patrick.
I didn't know. We didn't know that, but everybody thought we were crazy. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh yeah, no, that could happen.
That is so crazy.
See, I learned something new. Now I know.
Well, thank y'all so much.
Thank you. See y'all. Bye.